Today on Biblical Higher Ed Talk, I sit down with Mark Maxwell, President of Prairie College, to talk about fundraising. Every college does it, but few have been as successful as Mark. What are the keys to maximize giving? Thank you for tuning in today. I'm your host, Philip Dearborn, President of ABHE. And today we welcome in Mark Maxwell. Mark is the president of Prairie College in Three Hills, Alberta, in north of the U.S. border in the great country of Canada, to talk about a subject that gets a lot of attention. And I'm certain every one of our member institutions is involved in some form of raising money with varying degrees of success. And Mark has been quite successful. And today I thought it would be a great idea to bring him in, pull back the curtain a little bit and say, okay, Mark, what has made you so successful, Prairie so successful on the fundraising side of things? Mark, welcome to the show.
It's an honor, Philip, to be on your show. It's an honor to be talking to your listeners, and hopefully we'll not waste their time here today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And Mark, you and I have known each other for a number of years, where you served on the ABHE board for at least 2 terms. It could have been more than that if you were filling somebody else's term, but you were on the board. No, it was
just 2, but it was, the length of term depends on the wind chill.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go. There you go. But I got to know you when you were on the board, and certainly do appreciate it.
It was a great privilege. Yeah. I enjoyed it very much. It was a great honor.
Yeah, good. So. And really appreciate the work that you do. And I had the opportunity to tour all of our Canadian schools a couple of years ago, and an absolutely beautiful campus. So, so we have some questions that we're going to work through related to your fundraising experiences, and I think there's some good principles that come out of the story that you've been living there at Prairie. Before we do that, talk to us about you and some defining moment in your life that kind of propelled you forward, that kind of situated you to where you are today.
Probably the single biggest defining moment was, I would call it the worst day of my life. The day, January 30th, 1982, a long time ago, but it doesn't necessarily feel that long ago, when I lost my parents in a car accident. I was 23 years old. Thankfully, I had turned from being, let's say, a complicated or difficult to handle teenager into what I think was a great relationship with my parents, and I enjoyed that. But they were on ice in northern Canada, had a head-on car accident, both gone. Having been missionaries in Nigeria, I grew up in Africa. So, that awakening, I suddenly realized, one, I don't have grandparents for my kids. I didn't have a wife. I didn't have kids. I was just like, it was an odd thought. And probably the second thought for me was, I am going to choose to believe that in all things, God works for good. I still don't know what's good about losing your parents in a car accident. However, in all things, and that became the rock at the bottom of my sea that I put my anchor onto, and I rode out the tumult of the storm and made it through. I think that principle of deciding that in all things God, Romans 8:28 is what I'm quoting, that in all things God is at work for good. Not all things are good. No. But making that my life choice had me deal with further both successes and difficulties in future years. I had the privilege of working in the investment industry, had, some Cinderella stories there, and all of it was good. There were also some very, very difficult business times, and in it, God was working for good. And so that's been, and coming to Prairie was another defining moment. Was my wife in the, I would say, the nudge to come out here to Prairie and look after the school. I just asked her if she would come with me, but she was the one who said, I think it's time for you to get in the offering plate rather than just put money in. And I'm like, who taught you to preach? But she was the one who made the decision we should come out here and look after the school.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
those were not easy days. Those were difficult days. And I believed in those things. God was working for good. You can see how that's an enduring principle, and it's a whole worldview.
Well, it's a beautiful perspective too for those of us who are Christ followers, to know that, you know, our world is damaged by sin, and the fact that God is in the redeeming business of redeeming that which He created for good, and I think that's where that verse really comes in powerfully. That even in the bad circumstances, from a human perspective, we see those things, but somehow in His sovereignty, He's working all of those things together for our good, for His good.
And all of creation, I love your point, all of creation returning to its created purpose. Each component of creation added to all of the rest of us. You know, we humans are at our best when we are truly wholly invaded by God, humans.
Well, we could spend the rest of the podcast episode just on this subject matter. We can ditch the fundraising side of it and go to town. But
I think there's good theology in that conversation.
There is. So let's switch gears, and so we have some questions. We'll get to the fundraising one. The first thing I want you to kind of talk about for our listeners, and this is something that I learned 2 years ago, headed up to Canada to visit our 19 Canadian institutions. And I came back changed. One, I just love the country, beautiful country, and just the opportunity to interact with presidents and leadership teams and faculty and students at our Canadian institutions. But there's a difference. It's a different country. We have the United States, we have Canada. And, you know, I came back and would describe to my wife, to my family, hey, what's Canada like? It's like, man, it's very much like the United States, but not. There are definitely some differences. So as you've kind of lived in both worlds and now are in Canada, what would you say is the top difference? Contextualize it to biblical higher education when you compare the institutions in Canada versus the institutions in the United States.
One, I agree with you. Canada is a tremendous country, both to visit and to live in. I happen to carry both passports, U.S. and Canadian, so I have the choice of living on either side of the border, and sometimes I'm kind of on both. I would say that we chose to live in Canada for several reasons, but one of them was we felt that there was a greater spiritual need, dearth, hunger here than there is in the U.S. That's not to take anything away from the challenges in the U.S. It's rather to say, when we were applying for our Bachelor of Education, so now I'm bringing it home to ABHE or Biblical Higher Ed. So we're trying to get a Bachelor of Education here approved by the province. In our interview with the Quality Assurance Council, the last question on their list was, would you be willing to move on your core moral fabric in order to fit in better with the rest of us? And that shows how overt the conversation is that is anti-Christian. They are not happy with us applying for a Bachelor of Education to be, I might say, preparing people for that most important pulpit in the land, the classroom, the K-6 classroom, or the K-12 classroom. I believe that is the most important pulpit in the nation or in the continent, and maybe in the whole world. And we have not done a great job of going after it as Christians in good citizenship ways. I'm looking to be good neighbors, but it was rather overt. I responded to the chair by saying, well, I think what you want us to be is good citizens. And then I used some illustrations of how we are good citizens with our fellow colleges and universities. We are good citizens with our local town who are asking us to look after the airport for them, those kind of things. And my question at the end of it was, I don't know what we could do to be better citizens, but I'd be very interested in being better citizens.
Yeah.
And her answer was, well, I guess we have our answer. And the answer was, no, we're not going to move on our core moral fabric.
Yeah.
I believe if we do, it spells the demise of our school.
Exactly. And I picked this up when I was in Canada, interacting with other colleges. Is in a lot of ways, Canadian institutions, culturally, socially, are further down the road where the U.S. is, and yet you're able to flourish, and yet you're able to operate an institution of biblical higher education in Canada. So I think sometimes in the U.S. it is challenging days. I don't want to diminish that side of it, but it's not all doom and gloom. And in fact, if we look at our greater purpose of going and making disciples historically with the church in times of challenge, or when the church grew the most. And so it is possible to do. It just means it's more challenging. And it's more overt, like you said. I think we pick it up indirectly here in the U.S., but I think in Canada, as the example you gave, is a very strong one to say, oh, it's overt, it's directly questioned, and yet you don't compromise on your position and say, no, that isn't something that we're willing to give up.
I actually think are distinctive of being Christians and abidingly biblical, and I have abandoned almost all other labels. I want to be known as a Christian who is biblical. But I believe that distinctive is our strength. It's not a handicap. It is the only way that we will survive. It carves out the little piece of the turf on the field that we should serve and look after. And our turf should be the greenest on the whole field. So I think,
well said.
God will look after us that way.
Yeah. You've led Prairie College. You came in some very difficult days. And as you reflect back over that time in your leadership, and this kind of sets the fabric for then the fundraising aspect of it, what were some of the key leadership strategies you used to create that forward momentum on campus?
Right. When I arrived, the school was quite divided, siloed, bureaucratic, professional. All of those are bad words. Let me say that again. Professionalism is not effectiveness. We are called to be effective, not be professional. And anytime we use professionalism to impede effectiveness, it's evil. We were all of those bad things. We had internal battles. We were creating our own demise. And I wanted to, I simply turned to God and asked him. At that time, it was almost, what do you want me to do today? And by now I'm thinking, what should we be doing for the next 50 years? It didn't spell the horizon of my normal. It was rather, what's the most important right now? And today was most important. At that time, I also asked God, why did you perpetrate this mess on the face of the earth? Now, I think that the real core underneath that, or coming out of that, I think it's coming out of that, is to proclaim the gospel. We are in biblical higher education, in the gospel proclamation business. But we do it with education, with biblical integration or biblical impregnation, and then international travel. And so it was out of that conversation, you might say, with God, where he pushed me, I felt quite strongly, toward do the Bible, teach the whole of the Bible. And so we borrowed a formula from Dallas Theological Seminary. Remember, they're a graduate school, we're undergrad. There are lots of differences between us. However, they do teach the whole of the canon in 66 books to every student who gets a degree there. I'm like, okay, that's what we want to do. So my wife and I went down and spent a day with them and asked if we could borrow their formula of 4 Old Testament courses to cover a reading of the entire Old Testament canon, and then 3 New Testament courses to provide a reading of the New Testament canon. So I brought that idea back, we made it our own, we integrated it into our curriculum. We then moved it into a board level decision out of faculty, and then we moved it into our constitution. And right after that, we took Bible out of our name. We went from Prairie Bible Institute, a great name that served its time well, to Prairie College, which is a better international handle for helping our students travel internationally for gospel proclamation. But we got it where it should be. We put Bible where it should be, not on the sign. The sign, sure, we can have it out there. I don't care. But if it's not in your classroom, you're failing.
Yeah.
And so we moved that into the core of what every 4-year degree student gets. And they get a full reading of the canon in 7 courses. That was number 1, to fundraise it. more important than the ask.
Yeah.
Secondly was, how are we going to do this? And at that time, I was trying to skim the New Testament. I was trying to do it once a week. I don't think I ever succeeded, but it's an interesting challenge or quest to just skim it, read it, keep it flipping pages, no word studies, no deep dive, no cross references, just keep reading it. And at that time, I was trying to do that on a continuous basis to see what I would hear from God about what he wanted us to do. And the thread that I kept picking up almost on every page was love one another, live in harmony, be united. The one that just stuck like glue to my wall was John 17. Let my disciples love one another as you and I, as I love you, you and I are one, so that the world will know that I came from the Father. That's a fantastic, like the logic of that thing breaks, because how we get along as Christians, it is the best gospel proclamation that we can have to our witness, to our neighbors. And when they see us getting along well, suddenly they're like, well, would you like to look after our airport? So those are the two big things: returning to our creative purpose to teach Bible, to do it in a very Christian way, to live well together. The witness to that was Best Christian Workplace, where in 2007 we'd scored a terrible score. I think it was the lowest score, or one of the lowest scores, for sure, that Best Christian Workplace had ever seen. And then 2015 we took it again, and 18 and 21. So we do it every 3 years. And in 24 we got a 4.42, which is the highest score that they'd seen from a school, and I think it's one of the highest they've seen from any organization. That is, I think, the normal call to all Christian organizations.
Yeah, so those things kind of created the context. So you were very intentional. You came into a situation where there wasn't purpose, there wasn't drive, there wasn't the community wasn't rallying around something, and you clearly established we are 100% a Bible college focused on teaching the Word of God as our foundation, because we believe everything.
Integrate community.
There you go.
And those are the fundraising tools. You serve your creative purpose. I don't care what it is. To make juice, do it really well. And do it with a happy team, your business will grow. Or God will bless it, is the better way to say it. I don't want to sound like gospel, whatever. But doing those two things were the most important part of fundraising for us. And you know what? If we turn into an ugly house, or we walk away from our creative purpose, I believe all of the fundraising tools and advice and rock is going to fall on its face.
Yeah, sometimes we make it too complex, don't we? So some of the solutions, some of the foundational pieces are pretty clear from Scripture. So you're in the middle of a very serious capital campaign. Just take a minute or two to tell us about what that campaign is and what your goal is and what you've been able to raise so far, because I really want to get into then what then drives that. So tell us a little bit about that campaign.
We were coming up on our 100th anniversary, so 2022, we were founded in 1922 by my grandfather, actually. I thought, we'd been here since 2010, so we've been here 12 years, and I was thinking, every president is marked by the buildings they put up, right? And I hadn't put any buildings up. The only building I had successfully gotten constructed was our sign on the front lawn, a total of $60,000, and I was like, okay, I'd call that a failure. Except I think we've built a foundation that others can build on. And I had actually said to God, well, it doesn't look like I will do the building, but I'll prepare the ground for the next person. So 22, I pulled out a pad and sort of wrote down the things that I thought needed to be fixed or renovated or new or turned, made the list, added it up. It was about $100 million. Now, these are small dollars, Canadian, and about $100 million, $115 million. Okay. Went to the board, asked how they feel about it. They were just enthusiastic as could be. It's like, wow, okay, I guess they're ready for it. Began talking to donors, and a year later we had $1 million in. So that was May of 23. Now, development consultants were telling me, get 75% in and then bring it out. It's called the silent phase. And I'm like, no, I want to do this as a grassroots effort. I want to do this in a way where everybody feels like they're part of the story. And therefore, we start from zero. Again, a year in, we were at $1 million, and I kind of looked up and I'm going, so you're going to take a 100 years to get this in, are you? And then in October last year, we were at 2 million. Like, oh, good. You cut the time in half, 50 years. So I had been working with major donors in the relationship, but I wasn't well organized. Now, in the period of May to October, we had retained 2 consultants who were helping us. One was on the alumni side, and the other was on the major donor side. So that was how we were getting organized, and that helped us bring the number to 2 million on our way to 100. And then in January, we were at 11 million. And then in March, we were at 21 million. By now, you're beginning to see the actual fingerprints of our consultants. They were bringing in their messaging and their relationships to bear on our mission. And, to this day, we had one major donor, and by now we're at 28.5 million on our way. So 1 year after we were at 1 million, we're at 28.5. And I would never want to take credit away from that major fundraiser for what he did for us. I don't think he could have done it without the groundwork we had set.
Right.
Of mission and community, creative purpose and community. But he couldn't have done it without us, and we couldn't have done it without him. And it's been a tremendous symbiotic effort. He really, really believes in what we are doing here at Prairie. He believes in higher education, especially biblical higher education. He's a former minister of education for our province. So very senior guy.
So you're 30% into it with which is amazing in the amount of time that you've been able to get this far, and you have a ways to go, but you have a lot of opportunities in front of you, and there's all kinds of lessons even in what you just said, even as you as president, because I know a lot of our presidents feel the pressure of raising money, and this building was built on my time, right? So I think you illustrate very well the stewardship of the position, that you are very forward looking to say this is not about Mark, this is about the future of the institution.
Philip,
and
I was so sure I wouldn't put up a building. I'd already said that to God. Okay, good. We're preparing the ground for the next guy or woman.
Yeah.
And that'll be their job to get it done. Yeah. And then suddenly he said, yeah, why don't you just watch? So really, it was God. It was all of us. Every person on our team is part of our fundraising, because if we've got faculty who get along well together, and if we've got faculty who get along well with the executive team, and that's important, because if we do, the fundraisers will lean in and do their part. I mean, the donors will.
Yeah. So you've gone into the next question. So as you look back, as you reflect, and no, you're good. This is perfect.
Yeah.
What would you say are some of those reasons why you've been successful? You've already said the 2, but then even talking about unity, or I don't think you like the word unity, but
I like harmony better. Yeah.
Harmony. There we go. Of faculty being on board with it.
Yeah.
That this is a community shared experience. So are there any other things? Reasons why you've been successful?
Well, we needed to fix our economic model. We needed to be profitable. Yeah. I have met a few major donors. I can think of one right now in the Vancouver area who kind of feels like he's trying to respond to the most important need. And so because we're profitable, he doesn't see us as most needy. I'm like, oh man, that is just so upside down. But anyway, we needed to fix our economic model so that we were consistently turning a sustainable profit. So we cut our payroll in 2010 was double what it was by the end of 2012. One person at a time. I laid off almost all of those people personally, but we needed to get down to half of what we had been. We'd been losing $1 million a year on $7.5 million in revenue. Now we're at that point, a year and a half later, we were sustainably profitable at $300,000 or $500,000 a year. Since then, we've grown our revenue by 50%. We've doubled our enrollment headcount, and it's because we're all doing our created purpose within this greater created purpose.
Yep.
We all need to be part of it. So the beauty of harmony is when I need to cut costs, we call it a family meeting once a month. We meet as staff and faculty, and I'll tell them, Here's where we are on our P&L for this year. We've got this much in revenue, 10 or 11 million revenue now. We're spending at a rate that should have us losing $500,000. We need to take $500,000 out between now and the end of the year. I don't want to do this alone. Would you guys help me figure this out? Tell me what you can save, push into the next year, wait and spend it later, or don't spend it at all. Don't hire more people. In a community that's working collectively on this great creative purpose, everybody will help cut costs.
Yeah.
And when we're living in harmony, more people want to buy the product. So it helps drive revenue. And that's, to me, important as well.
Yeah, it speaks volumes about the culture on campus and the hard work that it takes to get to this position. And I think a lot of times in the fundraising world, we only see the success stories of how much somebody raised without it's 10% of, we see the wins, right? We don't see all of the work. It's the iceberg of all of the work that it takes.
And we artificially brag about the wins and forget about the, let me tell you this. I'm going to talk about time in terms of fundraising because I think that's something that everybody should be thinking about. At the beginning, I stayed on campus almost 100% of the time. And I heard people saying, well, you're CEO, you got to be off campus for 40 or 50% of the time. I'm like, the first time I left campus for a week, there was a mutiny. Okay? Like one of our executives called a staff and faculty meeting. Thankfully, no one showed up. But he was planning to move into my office within short order, I think. I don't know.
Yeah.
It didn't gestate. So I had to be here. And I was the one who was adjudicating and identifying, the people that needed to stay and go and implementing it. People didn't know how to fire people because, Christians don't fire people. We believe in the second chance. Yeah, I do. But I think Jesus is the Messiah. It's his job to do the transformation, not mine. So as we got our way through that, then I was able to spend more and more time. And I gradually have raised my time. And now I'm trying to be 75% off campus or externally focused. The team, frankly, they don't need me. They don't want me. So I got to go where I'm wanted.
Yeah. And that's another great leadership point too. There isn't a single approach. There's so many factors that come into play as to how you act as a leader. And the circumstances that you're in dictate that. And sometimes you have to be an authoritarian leader because the budget or the circumstance requires you to be that leader. Yep. That's not always the best approach, but in seasons of leadership, that is the right approach. You having to be on campus 99% of the time, you had to be there. You couldn't afford to be away. Well, now it's reversed. Now you do need to be away because things are operating well.
They don't want me around here. No, I'm really good with major donors. I really enjoy them, love the work. Yeah. Let me give you this also. Listen, I have a very genuine favorite book, and that's the Canon of Scripture. A couple of others are Contrarian Guide to Leadership by Steve Sample. Another is The Art of War, classic. The first chapter in The Art of War is Know Yourself and Know Your Enemy. A key principle embedded in that first chapter of The Art of War is know your enemy. No enemies in the camp. Okay, so now I'm talking to your listeners. People, if you have enemies in your camp, it is your duty as executive, as CEO, to get the enemies out. If you've got people who are undermining others on your team, if you've got people who are attacking your mission or diverting effort from your mission, it's your duty, it's my duty as CEO to go over there and see if I can do a small course correction to get them on team. But it's not my job to change them. Yeah. And God may be using my work of getting them out of here to change them. And so it is the call on CEOs to lay people off. Get the ones who are the enemies in your camp out today. That doesn't, here's another thing. Make the decision and then worry about the implementation. The decision and the implementation don't have to be back to back. They might be 6 months apart. But don't take your time just because you want to avoid the implementation. First, make the decision. Is this a person who is in or not in our team or on our mission? If they aren't, you've made the decision.
Yeah.
It's time
In
for
fact,
that.
I often say you lose twice in those instances.
Yep.
You're putting up with somebody who's doing damage to the organization, but you're also forfeiting the right person actually in that position doing the best that they can. So you're actually
And
two X
number
behind.
3, those people are impeding others' effectiveness. So there's a third cost.
Yep.
Themselves,
There is.
their neighbor, and then the person who's potentially contributing tremendously.
Yeah.
So we must
Mark,
make those changes and get them out.
Yeah. Yeah, we're down to our last minute, and it's not fair for this last question for a minute, but you've got 60 seconds to do it. So you've been around biblical higher education for some time. You mentioned your grandfather founding the school, which is an awesome story for another time. But as you look forward, what does the future of biblical higher education look like?
Oh, I am so excited about the future. I believe there's a pendulum swing in society where society is looking back to Scripture now. I think reading Scripture is transforming of minds and organizations. I think the need for what we do is great and greater now than it was over the past whatever decades. I'm excited about it. I think there's enormous amount of resource available. And the world wants what we have. We just need to package it up well and present it in a very attractive, uncompromising way. And what we're trying to do here is build a Bible university for the world. And I think people are going to beat a path to this, but it'll take us 50 years to build that.
Yeah, and step into it, own it.
Yep.
This is our time. This is our mandate. We don't need to compromise.
It's our privilege.
It's our privilege.
Yeah.
Indeed. Well, Mark, really, I appreciate the conversation today. Appreciate your knowledge.
God bless you, Phil.
And sharing your
so good to be on the line with you, and thank you for sharing your audience with me.
Absolutely. And if you want to learn a little bit more about Prairie College, we've put a link to their website on the show description, and as well as a couple other resources that Mark was willing to share with us. So until next time, stay kingdom focused.